Like a lot of other Pascal graphics cards, the 1080 is a personal favourite of mine. For $599 US when it launched, it offered incredible gaming performance and value. 4K gaming was a possibility on a single graphics card, which 8 years ago was kind of unheard of. You'd need like SLI and stuff like that. But in 2016, when this dropped, 4K gaming was starting to be a possibility. Obviously today 4K gaming isn't really going to be a possibility in new games on a 1080, but thanks to its 8GB of VRAM, 1080p and 1440p should be a relatively decent shout. And I'm happy to report that its decent value translates to the used market, as I picked up this MSI Gaming X for just £95. But to see how this sub £100 GPU gets on in 2024, I've tested it at both 1080p and 1440p, but if I'm being honest with you, 1080p is definitely the sweet spot with this graphics card. But all testing has been done in my testing PC, which has a Ryzen 5 7600, 32GB of 6200MHz CL32 DDR5 memory, a 2TB Western Digital SN770 NVMe SSD, and an MSI X670E Tomahawk motherboard. All settings for the 1080 have been left at its stock out-of-the-box settings, and the latest NVIDIA driver has been used at the time of testing. I can't remember it off the top of my head, and you probably can't either, so it'll be listed down there. With that being said, let's see how this gets on. Cyberpunk at Full HD on the 1080 is a very good experience. 60 frames per second on average on the high preset is a win in my opinion, and that 1% low at Full HD is also looking quite good at 50 FPS. Where things do start to fall apart ever so slightly, well, it's more than slightly, is 1440p, but this is a trend amongst pretty much every single other graphics card. So realistically, keep it to Full HD in Cyberpunk on the GTX 1080 and you'll be having an excellent gaming experience. This trend continues to Hogwarts Legacy, where the average was 59 FPS for Full HD, which to be honest is not going to be noticeable between that and 60 FPS anyway. So the high preset at Full HD is a good experience here. 1440p, well, it sees a little more to be desired, as 43 FPS on average isn't particularly brilliant performance. Yes, it's playable, but PC gamers are pretty much expecting 60 FPS these days. Where you'll be exceeding these frame rates a lot is in esports games like Fortnite. On the DirectX 11 API here, you're good enough for like 320 FPS on average, with a decent 1% low as well at Full HD. 1440p sees the average frame rate drop to around 230ish. Still, this is excellent performance, and if you had a 240Hz monitor here, you're not going to be complaining at all. The 1% low at 1440p isn't the best in the world, but Fortnite is quite prone to stutter, so it's not really that alarming. Even badly optimised games like Jedi Survivor do seem quite playable on the 1080. 50 frames per second on average at Full HD isn't the best performance in the world, I'll be honest, but when you consider the 1080 is 8 years old now, yeah, I know, this is still quite a win in my book. 33 FPS at 1440p isn't really that great. If you were sort of after a 30 frames per second experience, it'd be fine here, but the traversal stutters are quite bad, as we can see from that 1% low here. So do I recommend a 1080 for Jedi Survivor? Maybe, maybe not. Definitely not for 1440p though. Starfield is the same story as Jedi Survivor. It's not a very well optimised game, and I don't think it even looks that good to justify the performance you're getting here. If you have anything older than Ampere, Starfield just doesn't perform well, and as we can see, 1080p on the 1080 isn't even that great. 1440p is even worse. You're going to be getting just over 30 frames per second on average. Not an ideal gaming experience in my book. After its enhancement, The Witcher 3 is actually quite hard to run on DirectX 12, and in hindsight, DX11 should have been a better bet here. But on the high preset, 45 FPS is going to have to do at Full HD, and 25 FPS at Quad HD. Yes, this game is very hard to run, so in hindsight, as I said, DirectX 11 should be a better option for you here. Where you won't need to worry about any of this is Spider-Man Remastered. 81 FPS on average and 62 FPS on average for 1080p and 1440p respectively means excellent performance across the board. No matter if you wanted to play at Quad HD or 1080p, Spider-Man Remastered performs excellently on this Pascal graphics card. Just like Spider-Man Remastered, God of War is also a great performer on the high preset. Playable performances at both 1080p and 1440p today means I can certainly recommend this graphics card for this ported PlayStation 4 classic. Pascal simply just refuses to die. It's still relevant 8 years on from its launch, as performance on the whole at Full HD was relatively fine and free from issues. Yeah, there were games where you'd get less than 60 FPS like Starfield, Jedi Survivor and even The Witcher 3, but in the case of Starfield and Jedi Survivor, they're pretty sloppy PC ports, and I'm not surprised that the 1080 couldn't keep up in these games. As for The Witcher 3, if I'm being honest with you, in hindsight DirectX 11 does seem like the better API for older GPUs like these Pascal ones, so that's what I'd recommend for The Witcher 3. But if we put that behind us and turn onto the good side, most games today performed very well at Full HD. Even Cyberpunk on the high preset with the 1080 got 60 frames per second. This is an absolute, well, wild result, as Cyberpunk when it launched didn't really perform that well on Pascal, but now I know it's Full HD, but this GPU is 8 years old. Where things get even better for the GTX 1080 is esports gaming at Full HD. The 1080's got enough power to drive a 360Hz monitor in these types of competitive games like Fortnite, Counter-Strike and Rainbow Six Siege, and I suspect you won't be having any troubles on this graphics card. To lower the input latency, this also supports NVIDIA Reflex Low Latency, so if you wanted as minimal input lag as possible, this GPU's got that covered. Like I alluded to before we went onto the benchmarks, Quad HD gaming was going to be a pretty tall order for the GTX 1080, and for the most part that was true, particularly with the newer AAA games, where a lot of these titles would perform pretty well at 1080p, they kind of struggled and lagged behind at the higher resolution. But good news though, if you're a fan of PlayStation exclusives, God of War and Spider-Man performed excellently at 1440p, but this is something I was expecting. These are ports of 2018 games which originally launched on the PS4, so I expected the 1080 to have quite a good time here, and that it did. For me, if you wanted to play at 1440p with the 1080, I'd recommend esports games where a 240Hz or even a 144, as 144Hz 1440p monitors are quite common now. I would say the 1080 is quite good for these, and if you wanted to play older titles which aren't going to be a struggle for this graphics card anyway, that's what I'd recommend for 1440p, but other than that, 1080p is definitely the recommendation I can give for this GPU. I firmly believe that Pascal is the best GPU generation to ever release, and you might agree with me on this. Not only did you see huge performance benefits on the high end with graphics cards like the GTX 1080 Ti, but we also saw it on the low end with GPUs like the GTX 1060 6GB. This is something that's been notably lacking on Ada Lovelace RTX 40 series graphics cards, as these saw massive performance gains with like the RTX 4090, but the lower end of the product stack is pretty diabolical, and you probably think the same as well. Combine this with Pascal's awesome value at the time and we truly got the golden era of PC gaming. Man, I would love to go back to these times, and you probably would as well. Just like the 1080 Ti which I took a look at recently, I firmly believe Pascal graphics cards like the GTX 1070, 1070 Ti and the 1080 will remain relevant until the drivers get dropped, and even then the streets will never forget the GTX 10 series, otherwise known as Pascal. So if you want to see how the GTX 1080 Ti gets on, the bigger brother of this graphics card, there's a video up there. With that being said, I'll catch you in the next one.